Hello everybody and welcome back to Revolutionary Left Radio. I'm your host and comrade, Red Rosa, and today we have the other part of our Rosa Luxemburg double episode feature special we're doing. This part is with Kate Evans, the author and illustrator of the amazing graphic novel called Red Rosa, about the life of Rosa Luxemburg. And it's such a wonderful aesthetic accomplishment, an intellectual one, a biographical one. There's so many wonderful dimensions to Red Rosa. I really cannot recommend it enough. And Kate herself is just a lovely human being and is absolutely just a pleasure to talk to. Her passion and her sense of humor and her kindness and her thoughtfulness absolutely come through in every second of this interview with her. So I really hope people enjoy this. And again, this is the other half of our sort of two-part series on Rosa Luxemburg. This is really focused on her life and her biography. And then the other episode, which will be released on the same exact day, is with Simone Norman. And that really focuses specifically on Rosa's theoretical work within the confines of Marxism. So definitely check out both of those episodes. It doesn't matter in which order you listen to them, but the goal is to get a really well-rounded, multi-dimensional view of Rosa Luxemburg and who she was, not only as a historical figure or even as a Marxist, but as a well-rounded human being. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Kate Evans, and I hope you do as well. And as always, if you like what we do here at Revolutionary Left Radio, you can go to revolutionaryleftradio.com, find our YouTube page, find our Patreon, and if you do join our Patreon and you support the show, you get a bunch of bonus Patreon content every month. So yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and get into this wonderful interview with Kate Evans, the author and illustrator of Red Rosa. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Kate Evans. I'm an author, an artist, sometimes an activist, sometimes a mother, and a graphic novelist. I've written a graphic biography of Rosa Luxemburg entitled Red Rosa.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm a huge fan of this book. I know I've messaged you about how moving it is and how often it brings me to tears. Not only, we'll get into like her death later on, but even just the depiction of her kindness to the animal who was carrying the cart and being beaten. I mean, you just really bring the emotive, visceral human side of her out in such beautiful and compelling ways. So I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Cheers. We've got how many seconds into the interview and my daughter's coming already. So... Say hi to Brett. You're on Revolutionary Left Radio.
Hello?
You're on the radio. How cool is that?
Hello from Nebraska.
Okay, give me a kiss. Okay. All right. Need you to go to bed now. Bye. Go and learn some more history so you can help inspire the next generation. Sure.
And do a piece.
Whatever.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening, not only reading your book, obviously, but listening to lectures you've given and other interviews you've done. And it's just so exciting to listen to you talk about Rosa. So I'm so happy to have you here. Let's just jump into the questions. I guess first question is, why and when did you decide to create this beautiful graphic novel about Rosa Luxemburg's life, and what did you hope to really achieve with it?
I didn't decide to create a graphic novel about Rosa Luxemburg's life. I was commissioned. So I was 70 pages into writing a book about physiological birth, maternity, and pregnancy. It was basically a pregnancy manual. And I got an email from Paul Bull, who's a retired comics academic, who's devoting his retirement to creating graphic novels of revolutionary leaders. Now he's behind the International Workers of the World Wobblies graphic novel. He's behind the graphic novel biography of Che Guevara and A Dangerous Woman about Emma Goldman.
Wow.
So he'd come up with the idea of doing a biography of Rosa Luxemburg. He'd asked some mutual contacts at World War III Illustrated, namely Seth de Bachman, if he knew any female artists who would be good for the book. And he sent me this email that said, would you be interested in drawing and maybe writing a graphic novel of Rosa Luxemburg? And basically the only thing I knew about Rosa Luxemburg was, oh, she's one of those groovy women that people bang on about. I'm sure she's vaguely something good. And I replied and said yes before I Googled who she was. Which, in my
Bold of
defense,
you.
a lot of my early activism was spent in a tree, okay, on a motorway roads protest, where really we didn't have much access to theory. We were kind of living this stuff rather than analysing it. And the most of the time since I spent at the Anarchist Book Fair seemed to be more about drinking than reading the books. So maybe that's just a British attitude to anarchism. So I didn't actually know a great deal about Rosa Luxemburg at all. And the more I found out, the more just blown away I was by her vitality, her theoretical clarity, her intellectual rigor and power, and her complete kind of like badass attitude to life. And so it was just an incredible honor to be able to bring that into a book. I mean, I just had this amazing subject. I've got Rosa Luxemburg's life, which has it was really good for me at the time, because I was thinking about writing something about capitalism, but my previous book, Funny Weather, about climate change, had ended up sort of falling between two stools. I'd done a book about climate change in comic form, and I thought that meant that people would be really interested in reading a science book in comics form, but actually people don't really know what to do with that kind of thing. Like, didn't make it into the science bookshops, and it didn't make it into the comics bookshops. So I wanted to do something similar about capitalism, but I was a bit kind of like, oh God, this is going to be a bit dull and dry. But then by writing about Luxemburg, I get to write about Luxemburg's theories, and I get to ground it all in a straightforward explanation of Marxism. And so I got the opportunity to draw the comic that I hoped would have the effects on readers that reading Das Kapital for the first time had on me as a student when I was 17. So I took the whole of volume 1 of Das Kapital and I turned it into a 12-page conversation between Rosa Luxemburg and her brothers, which is a miracle of compression. But it enabled me to say from the outset, the problem is capitalism, and this is how capitalism is the problem. And then to take that and then explore all of Luxemburg's life and works on the back of that enabled me to, it was sort of like, it was really good, not just because it's about Luxemburg, but also because it's about something that is even more of a problem now than it was in Luxemburg's day, which is capitalism and the limits to growth.
Yeah, exactly. And in a lot of ways, Rosa was so prescient and predictive in just how capitalism would unfold. And although she didn't have any idea what climate change was, in some like indirect ways, she really predicted it. And it was so fascinating to see just how sensitive of a mind she had and how brilliant she was.
Actually, it's a kind of a weird disconnect between. I mean, there's two aspects of her personality, of her writings and her personality there. Like, she didn't have a particularly ecological critique of politics. I mean, she was very welded to this idea that society proceeds in stages, as laid out by Marx, the idea that an industrialized society in some ways is more advanced than a non-industrialized one. But at the same time, she had this really she sort of sidestepped a lot of the colonialist ideas of her age, and was an incredible critic of the genocide of indigenous peoples around the world. And she had this incredible love of nature. It's like they were all the seeds for modern politics, which was slightly divorced within her writings. They weren't necessarily theoretically tied together, but somehow they add up to a whole that is really very modern.
Yeah.
in its sort of overall kind of interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that you spent so many 12 pages or so just sort of summarizing Das Kapital, which is an amazing achievement in and of itself. But it's also in the form of a conversation between Rosa and her brothers, and putting theory into graphic novel form like that, really complex theory, is amazing to see, and you did it so well. So I just it leads well into this next question, which is can you talk about the unique challenges of portraying Rosa's life through the medium of comics and a graphic novel? Like, what are the advantages and disadvantages of taking that medium?
Not just her life, it's her work as well. The challenges is that she lived a full and interesting life, and I was commissioned to write 120 pages, and I managed to do it in 179.
Yeah.
So I already made it half as long again as what I was being paid for. And you have to really, really condense things to get it down into comics form. Like, I've been doing this for like 25 years, and now if I'm called on to write a newspaper article, I find it quite hard to waffle. I can't like just fill pages with like extraneous prose, because everything I do is about paring things down to like the tiny little tweetable sound bites. I don't want to say sound bites, but it's definitely about condensing things down so that I mean, Luxemburg has like thousands of pages of theory. And so to try and create a comic that gives an insight into what she was trying to say, you really do have to just pick out the few little quotes and points that are going to carry that to the reader. So one of the fun things about doing it as a graphic novel, I mean, you've mentioned that I talk about theoretical concepts in comics form. Well, I had experience of doing that with the climate change book. I really struggled with how to make climate change funny. It's called Weird Weather, or for the American edition, or Funny Weather for the UK edition. This book, by the way, it came out in 2008. Anyway, I really struggled with how to make climate change funny until I hit on the idea of climate modelers, who are climate scientists who run models of weather patterns around the globe through their computers. But I went, what if they actually made models? And so I got this visual idea of how you could show abstract physics and geographical concepts by a bunch of scientists sitting around in a lab and making models out of the earth with like Play-Doh and sellotape and physical things.
Yeah.
So I use this idea of using visual metaphors to carry abstract ideas. So I'm quite experienced in doing that. And that was great when it came to trying to show like the alienated worker as a dandelion seed blowing on the wind, or, you know, the precarious worker, I should say. Or using her cat as a reaction to almost having her cat sort of playing out some of the theories that Luxemburg's trying to describe in The Accumulation of Capital. So I'm used to this idea of trying to find the silliest visual metaphor and using it to liven the dense theoretical text. One of the other things that was really nice, that I really enjoyed doing in Red Rosa, and that I hadn't seen done before, is that I take Luxemburg's words, I take her political writings, and I take her personal letters, and I take direct quotes from them, and then I create the dialogue in the book using her actual words.
Wow.
And then I give you the full quote and its historical context in the notes at the end of the book. And it's like imagine if you could make a movie of someone's life, but they're speaking the actual words that they said at the time, that they're speaking words that are based on their actual writings, and then you can pause it and then get a link to their writing.
Right, yeah.
Within the graphic novel, I think uniquely, you have the ability to do that. You're creating a visual drama, and yet you cross-referenced it historically and, given it academic annotation. And I've seen some books that have done that since, but I hadn't seen it done before. So it was nice to feel that I was kind of doing something a little bit groundbreaking in that regard.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it was, it worked to complete effect. Absolutely, like my engagement with this text very much was a unique experience completely, because I had never come across something structured in quite that way. I do want to move on, and in Red Rosa, you portray with honestly genuine beauty, humanism, and even eroticism Rosa's intense love life and sexuality. In other interviews, you've talked about how some of the reviews of your book even kind of recoiled in the face of the explicit sex scenes that you have in the text, but that it was important for you to portray it anyways. So I was hoping you could talk about that process and the thinking behind it on your part.
Well, part of the light in which graphic novels are viewed in certain British culture is that they're seen as something for children. And people say, oh, would it be nice for a child? And I go, well, it does have Bush Zetkin going down on her, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you want to give that to your 8-year-old. I mean, it is a healthy view of sexuality. Yeah. I mean, there's two parts in the answer to the question is that one is I think it was really important to show, well, no, I wanted to show her as a real human being. And I think a lot of biography can fall into the trap of hagiography or in some ways, you know, people just become historical characters, almost like a costume drama. I wanted to show the physicality of the reality of her having a lived life. And so I start the book with her as a baby in a pram. And I finish the book at the point when her body is dropped into the Landwehr Canal. And her physical body exists on the pages. I think that's very, you know, it helps someone feel very engaged and connected. I mean, I was chatting to Seth de Bokman about this. Have you seen his work? He wrote Len, a Lawyer in History, that I was reading recently, and he doesn't actually go into his, it's a biography, and he doesn't go into his character's sex life, partly because some of the people that Len had slept with are still living, and so that was a little hard to
tricky.
do. I mean, I had some freedom in that Luxemburg died 100 years ago. So although I had lots of photos of her all around the studio. And while I was drawing the sex scenes, I did think, oh my God, what would she actually think?
That's hilarious. But yeah, did you feel also like, because in other interviews you talked about sort of the hyper patriarchal society she existed in and how like women's sexuality was really repressed at the time, and so that was another part of the reason why you displayed it so explicitly?
I mean, there is a feminism in like I get to have a character who has hairy legs and hairy underarms because that's historically accurate.
Yeah.
It's not just a feminist thing.
For sure.
Yeah, Luxemburg's life and work has to be viewed through the lens of patriarchy, in that I mean, for God's sake, she was meant to graduate from university with the highest honours, and they knocked that down to just with averagely great honours because they thought that would just be too much for a woman. And you might think that doesn't rankle, but Paul Levi mentioned it at her funeral, so I reckon it bloody did. Like, I mean, at one point she was appointed a editor to a left-wing newspaper, and she simply couldn't keep the job because none of the male journalists would accept having a woman put in over them, a woman immigrant Jew put in over the top of them. She's particularly, if you read the anti-critique to The Accumulation of Capital, which I totally reckon you should do before you read The Accumulation of Capital, because it's actually a really amusingly sort of fast-paced. What she's doing in the anti-critique here is she looks at all the reviews to her book, The Accumulation of Capital, which are all negative, and she pulls them to pieces. But you can see how, to what extent she was kind of like, even within this left-wing movement that had her as a kind of a figurehead in Germany in 1915, they completely did not value her work, and she completely, like, just hats off to her for absolutely refusing to compromise at any level on her intellectual ability, and just going, well, fuck you, I'm still going to keep writing Marxist theory, and it's still going to be really important and relevant.
Exactly.
I mean, if we look at how her work has been historically viewed as well, there's been a hell of a lot of focus on Luxemburg the martyr, or Luxemburg the writer of beautiful poetic letters from prison, but hardly any analysis of actually how good her political theory is. I mean, when you compare the amount of analysis there's been on Luxemburg's writing compared to the amount on Gramsci, now I'm going to put some... Okay, so I'm trying to tackle the prison notebooks at the moment.
Yeah.
And I can't help thinking, he did not finish this. This is like really scrappy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ideas in there, but they're not particularly coherently developed.
Exactly.
And like Gramsci is like some touchstone of leftist thought, and Luxemburg is a footnote. I mean, what are you on?
Right. Yeah, totally. I agree with that. Yeah, it's interesting. Like in her own life, she had to face that misogyny and that sexism, and even her legacy to this very day, still being marred by it in that exact way. Yeah, it's super interesting to think about that.
I mean, within Germany, what happened is her letters to a friend was published in very shortly after her death. And it caused quite a stir because people saw this completely other side of Luxemburg. She'd only been seen as this firebrand speaker shouting about revolution, and nobody had seen the side of her which, like, saving little wasps from drowning,
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. She had a real tenderness and a care of animals and a deep love inside of her.
Yeah, she fed wasps in prison from her jam ration.
Wow.
It's wasps.
It's adorable. Yeah.
That's just incredibly interconnectedness of all life going on there. But then people then, I think, lauded this sentiment. This then fitted into people's idea of like, oh, a martyred, lovely, sentimental woman. But she wasn't a sentimental woman. She was a Marxist theoretician. And I think we do her a big disservice if we don't prioritize that in our memory of what she did and who she was.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. What aspects of Rosa's personality and life do you think often get ignored, downplayed, or otherwise missed that you think are important or that really popped out to you in your research of her?
Well, I think all aspects of Rosa's personality had been ignored in the English language biographies that I read of hers, because there really hasn't been enough. There's really hardly any English language like exploration of who she was. I mean, and the events of her life. So there's 3 major biographies that I looked at. One by Paul Froelich, who was a student of hers. It's very interesting on the politics, but completely ignores her personal life. There's this 2-volume work by Nettle, who's a historian, and he just doesn't get her politics. He's like, well, at this point, Luxemburg was just being arsy by not agreeing with all the other members of the Social Democrat Party. It's like, no, she didn't agree with them because they were wrong and she was right. Okay?
Exactly.
Like she stood up for opposing the First World War, or rights.
Right, exactly.
And and then there's this one by a woman called Elizabeth Ettinger, who's a psychoanalyst from the 1960s, and I just think half of it's fictional. I don't view her as a reliable source at all on even on the basic events of Luxemburg's life. So pretty well all of Luxemburg had been ignored as far as I can see. I mean, as her biography, I got to ignore bits of her life that I didn't like or agree with because I only had 179 pages to write it all in. She was probably a bit factionalist in her early writings. I think she's mellowed on that by the time we get to like the actual events of the German Revolution in 1918. But certainly early on, I think there was a little bit of power broking going on with their setting up of the Lithuanian, her and Leah Jorgish's attempt at setting up rival socialist parties in Poland. And so one of the main sources for the book is I went directly to primary sources. I looked at her letters and I looked at her writings directly. I don't really rely very much on other people's interpretations of her because they're lately writing shit. But I get to show the bits in her letters where she's cheerful and outgoing and vibrant and engaged. I mean, she could also be really quite rude and really quite reserved, but I didn't have to show that side of her. There's a really good quote in one of her letters where she's like, and if you should see those fellows from the rival party, kindly take them to the window and boot them out of it.
She's an absolute firebrand in that way. And certainly being a rigid factionalist is nothing new in the long history of the left. I mean, we still have plenty of that today. It's a tradition on the left to be like that to some extent.
Well, she was critical of Lenin for being factionalist. She did write about the splits in the party in 1905 and was like, actually, we'll all need to sort it out and get together and have a big conference. Everyone was more or less her position. So
interesting. Well, yeah, that leads perfectly into the next question, and this is a big one, so you can take this in any direction you want. But I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the sort of intellectual and political relationship between Rosa and Lenin, because they were friends, and as well, they had very strong disagreements, and Rosa had some critiques of the Bolshevik Revolution and what came after. So can you talk about that relationship between Rosa and Lenin?
Okay, so get this. Mimi is Luxemburg's cat, by the way, and she explicitly refers to herself as Mimi's mother. That's how like her and her cat, they're a thing. Okay. Yesterday, so Friedenau, April the 2nd, 1911. Yesterday Lenin came, and up to today he's been here 4 times already. I enjoy talking with him. He's clever and well educated, and has such an ugly mug, the kind I like to look at. Poor Mimi keeps going kuru. She impressed Lenin tremendously. He said that only in Siberia had he seen such a magnificent creature, that she was a majestic cat. She also flirted with him, rolled on her back and behaved enticingly towards him, but when he tried to approach her, she whacked him with a paw and snarled like a tiger. You can read you like to that.
I love that so much. Oh, that's great.
She's writing to her 21-year-old lover there, so we can add all kinds of things onto that. She's 32. Right. So she was deep in the heart of Russian politics. I had a bit of a problem in showing. So I have already explained that Luxemburg's life is large and her theoretical body of work is large. And there are many events going on in it, and I had a limited amount of space. I also had to create a narrative that would carry the reader through. And to do that, you can't just pack in everything. Now, Luxemburg was born in Poland, which is under Tsarist control, and she left there at the age of 18 or 19, already an active socialist. And socialism was illegal in Tsarist Russia. Now, it's all very well being a socialist if you're like an average Polish bloke who can put on a flat cap, or you can put on a cap and change your papers and, and change your name and travel around the country spreading the socialist message. But when you are 4 foot 10 inches tall, have a pronounced limp and a gold tooth, and you're a woman and you're Jewish, and you are pretty bloody obvious, right, when you're the only socialist agitator who fits that description. So Luxemburg was a political refugee to Germany, first to Switzerland and then to Germany. And she's directly involved in the political life the development of socialism in Germany. But she is only indirectly involved in all the events of what's going on in Russia. She does travel back to Warsaw right at the end of 1905 to participate in the first Russian Revolution, and she gets arrested while in bed with her lover. Anyway, but she gets arrested in Warsaw, and then she gets bribed out of prison and escapes back to Germany. But that's the only point where she's directly involved with what's happening in Russia. So these 2 threads of her political activism, there's the German thread and there's the Russian thread. And she's only her participation in the Russian thread is to write the propaganda that is then exported out across Poland, Lithuania, and Russia in all the many languages that she spoke. But I can't really show that as a cartoonist because she's not actually there. So this whole story of Russia is pretty well ignored in my book. And I mention the fact that the Russian Revolution happened, but I don't include Luxemburg's critique of the Russian Revolution. It is interesting. It is quite vital, really. The thing is, where Luxemburg really differs from Lenin is in the democratic vision that she has for the proletarian uprising. There's a good quote here. This is while the German Revolution is happening. She says, "A bourgeois revolution could simply overthrow the official power and replace it with a couple of new men. but we must work from the bottom to the top. We can only come to power with the clear and explicit will of the great majority of the proletarian masses. So her vision of working class revolution is it's everyone doing it, and it's everyone doing it because everyone has realized that this is the way forward. So it's very much a mass movement, and it's very much by mutual consent. But and as such, she does have some very explicit critiques of Lenin's actions after he's got to power. Now she puts them out in a book called in a document called The Russian Revolution, which was printed posthumously, and apparently she was going to want to work it all up into another book, but then she died. She does this incredibly prescient analysis of what's going to happen if Lenin carries on along the path that he's currently on. Without general elections, without unrestricted freedom of press and assembly, without a free struggle of opinion, life dies out in every public institution, becomes a mere semblance of life in which only the bureaucracy remains the active element. Public life gradually falls asleep. A few dozen party leaders of inexhaustible energy and boundless experience direct and rule. Among them, in reality, only a dozen outstanding heads do the leading, and an elite of the working class is invited from time to meetings where they are to applaud the speeches of the leaders and to approve proposed resolutions unanimously. At bottom, then, a clique affair, a dictatorship, to be sure, not the dictatorship of the proletariat, however, but only the dictatorship of a handful of politicians. She hits the nail on the head. That's exactly like she's prefiguring Stalinism there. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
They are to applaud the speeches of the leaders and to approve proposed resolutions unanimously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's very, very much more democratic view of what's meant to happen after the revolution. And, like, who knows what a revolution on Luxemburgian lines would have ended up being like.
Yeah, that's the big, historical question is like, what would that, or even like the sort of historical counterfactual of if Rosa could have been in the Bolshevik Revolution or, played the role of Lenin, how would things have been different? We can never know that. But those critiques are interesting and they still play out today.
There would have been an ice pick for her, wouldn't there?
Well, I'm sad to say maybe at some point. I don't know. I'm not sure. It depends. I don't know if she gets the Trotsky treatment.
It's a speciality. I don't know. She was never going to compromise, was she?
That's true. That's one thing about her. She never fucking compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that's super interesting. There's so much there we could talk about. I mean, that could be an entire episode of its own. But I do want to move on, and I want to talk about the events of the German Revolution. So can you just maybe like summarize what the German Revolution was, talk about the Spartacus League and the sort of role that Rosa played in all of it?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's just an entire third of my book, you realise.
Yeah. Can you just go ahead and summarize that really quick?
Well, basically, when I did history at school and also again at like A-level, which is like our pre-university level, I don't know, high school plus, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what it is for you guys. But when I did German history at school, they completely neglected to mention the German Revolution. Basically, it went, and then there was the First World War. And then the First World War ended and Germany was defeated. And they completely skipped the bit where the proletariat of Germany rose up against the armed forces joined in, and then they stormed the capital, and then the Kaiser abdicated and handed control to the socialists. Like, they completely skipped that bit.
Yeah. Same here. Same in our teaching of it, yeah.
It was really, I mean, I just didn't even know there was a German Revolution. They said there was a bit of street fighting in Berlin, not like they took the newspaper quarter and then were holed up there. It's funny. It was a joy to try to create a narrative of it in graphic novel form, because it becomes like an action movie. Like, we're really doing it. We're on the streets. I mean, Luxemburg doesn't directly participate in that element of crowds taking to the streets because she's in prison for the whole of the First World War for opposing it. So she's undergoing indefinite imprisonment, but she gets released on about day 2 or 3 of the revolution, and then hurries off to Berlin to try and form an active part in it. Okay, so it was sort of I mean, in one view of it, it was fatally compromised because the Socialist Party were the largest party in the Reichstag at this point. And so when Kaiser abdicates and power is handed to the socialists, they already have an established party structure. Franz Ebert is the leader of the Social Democrats. He's then made Chancellor of Germany. And Ebert is reported to have said, "I hate revolution. If Kaiser does not abdicate, the social revolution is unavoidable, but I do not want it. Indeed, I hate it like sin." So he doesn't actually like revolutions.
And that's the leader of the SPD, right?
That's the leader of the SPD. So he's like leader of the socialists. He's now Chancellor of Germany. And then he immediately enters into negotiations with Groener, the general of the army. Groener offered Ebert the loyalty and cooperation of the armed forces in return for some demands: fight against Bolshevism, a speedy end to the soldiers' councils. So the soldiers have set up soldiers and workers' councils, which are intended to have power, and a restoration of the sole authority of the officers' court, a national assembly, and a return to law and order. So straightforwardly, and then the trades unions kind of back down from their revolutionary direct control of the seizure of the means of production, like within the first few days of the uprising. After there's a Stinnes Legend agreement with the corporations, where the workers are given an 8-hour working day, but they don't own the means of production. So that they've been given a concession. The trade unions have been given so there's a very uneasy state of affairs immediately after the revolution, where the workers have set up these workers and soldiers councils, and they feel like they've got all the power, but on the other hand, the socialists have the power, and they, as parliamentary politicians, have immediately signed up with the army and with the employers to keep things running, to keep the status quo going, and to wrest the power back from the working people. And in fact, when Luxemburg attempted to join address the Congress of Workers and Soldiers Councils, they didn't let her because she wasn't a worker or a soldier. That didn't work too well. So the Spartakists were anti-war, left-wing revolutionary socialists, including established public speakers and political figures like Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who was the only member of the Reichstag to have voted against war credits. And they formed a nexus of sort of a much more left-wing vision. And they put it out in their paper called Die Rote Fahne, the demands of what the Spartacus League would want. But in this kind of uneasy power struggle, with Ebert, who's actually Chancellor, their paper was like denied a ration of newsprint paper to actually get it out there to people, and various obstacles were put in their way. And then there's all these returning soldiers from the front, and they are really demoralized and quite embittered. And this is where we start to see the beginnings of like what eventually becomes the fascist Nazi stormtroopers. They are the Freikorps. They're these kind of roving bands of soldiers who are employed by capitalists to keep their workplaces safe, and they're still sort of part of the army. But in the end, Ebert and Noske, his right-hand man, actually put a price on Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg's head. There's a kind of a second uprising in January 1919, and workers attempt to have another revolution. But obviously that's kind of lost a bit of steam because people are like, oh, but the socialists are in charge already. And there's an absolutely hilarious bit where they go and try and take control of the Ministry of War, and the people on the gate are like, you're taking the Ministry of War? Oh, well, do you have authorization? What hilarious bit that I managed to put in the book is like, oh, sorry, you don't have authorization to storm the Ministry of War. We need an order. and we need it to be signed.
Yeah.
So they come back and get this signed order by Karl Liebknecht saying we're occupying the Ministry of War in the middle of confusion and mass uprising stuff, and in the end that's used to I mean, Luxemburg doesn't actually know anything about this, but Liebknecht's like written signature of "we are trying to overthrow the government" is then used, I think, to justify his murder. So the Freikorps and the army are brought onto the streets to take back the newspaper buildings which have been occupied by the Spartakists and the real left-wingers. And it was never a very strategic place that they'd occupied. They just occupied Vorwärts, which is the left-wing newspaper. They hadn't actually occupied, like, the treasury or anything.
Right.
And they have these fights with these massive, great rolls of newsprint out. I mean, everyone's got a gun. Everyone knows how to shoot. It's the direct link between the fact that the entire population is armed and the fact that revolutions can happen is something that's vaguely scary to think about if you're an American, I'm sure.
Right. Absolutely.
Anyway, they bring in the big guns, literally bring in the big guns, and take the Vorwärts building back. And then Luxemburg goes into hiding in Berlin, but refuses to flee the country. And she thinks she's being arrested, and she thinks she's going to go back into prison. She's got a little bag with her with some reading materials for carrying on, writing books in prison. But instead, she is beaten up and shot and dumped in a canal.
So just to take a moment there, German Revolution happens. There's a split on the left between what is today known as like the Social Democrats versus the Communists. The Social Democrats get the power. They then go into collaboration with the Freikorps, which is the proto-Nazi force, and they put a bounty on Karl and Rosa's head, and then the fascists go and carry out that political assassination. Today on the left, like in our meme communities and online, you'll often hear like the sort of funny meme phrase that say, the Social Democrats killed Rosa, and that's what they mean by this. It really was a collaboration between, the left liberal Social Democrats who want to maintain capitalism and get rid of their communist left, and the fascists who are more than happy to carry out that brutal assassination.
I think it's a little hard to call them fascist. Fascism implies a certain centralized organization. They are proto-fascist disillusioned troops.
There we go.
I think they do go around with skulls painted on the fronts of their vehicles, which is an absolute gift to the graphic novelist if you're trying to identify who the baddies are.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But it fractures the left wing in Germany irrevocably, because how are you going to forgive your parliamentary democratic socialist leaders for murdering your own hero, your own heroine? The bad blood that must have emanated that must, echo through to this day. So in Germany, if you've got a political party in power, then you get this big fat budget to create political education work. And the left-wing Die Linke group have got one called the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And then kind of moderate socialists have got one called the Franz Ebert Foundation. And I can't help thinking what must happen if they both book the same venue for a Christmas party.
Right, fuck. God damn.
Yeah, what's really scary now is Alternative for Deutschland is going to get a political foundation as well.
That's horrifying, yeah.
Yeah, that is really freaking scary.
Definitely. Well, I did want to say before we get into like the reflection and legacy and the conclusion, the way that you portrayed the death of Rosa in the book was so incredibly moving. I've read it back like 3-4 times. Every single time I read it, it just floods my eyes with tears and like breaks my heart all over again. The 15th of January, 1919. Do you think that 47 is old enough to die? If you do, you must be very young. Rosa Luxemburg lost half a lifetime. If she had lived, what more could she have achieved? Maybe saying this does her philosophy a disservice.
You see, I've learned from history that one should not overestimate the impact that one individual can have.
and her death was only one moment among many in the history of the working people of the world. But it was a very dark moment. With Germany poised between socialism and barbarism, the actions of the Freikorps foreshadowed far greater crimes against humanity to come. Do you think she went calmly, eagerly embraced the mantle of the martyr? No, she would have raged. Summoning the last of her strength after the rifle butt slammed her into semi-consciousness, she gave her final order.
Don't shoot.
But they did.
In the dark, I smile at life, as if I knew some sort of magical secret that gives the lie to everything evil and sad and changes it into pure light and happiness. And all the while I'm searching within myself for some reason for this joy. I find nothing and must smile to myself again and laugh at myself. I believe that the secret is nothing other than life itself. Order prevails in Berlin. You foolish lackeys. Your order is built on sand. Tomorrow the revolution will rise up again, clashing its weapons, and it will proclaim with trumpets blazing, I was, I am, I shall be.
I've never seen her death put in such beautiful and heartbreaking and tragic ways that you've been able to do with the words and the graphic part of the graphic novel. I really encourage people to get this book and just read that. It will bring you to tears, and it's so hard. But the beautiful thing you do at the end of that book, after you describe her death and you sort of visualize like her life flashing before her eyes as she descends into the oblivion of death, is, a modern person, perhaps yourself, I don't know who you thought of in that instance, sitting by Rosa's grave and being inspired by her to engage in Occupy protest. Was that supposed to be you in that text, or what did you, who was that? Was that just a stand-in for leftists today still being inspired by Rosa?
Yeah, it's not me at the end there. She's some kind of like slightly more ethnically ambiguous person. I don't think you necessarily wanted a plump white woman sitting by Rosa's. I didn't think I was going to carry it forward that much. Yeah. I was going to form the revolutionary picture. Although, weirdly, all my previous boyfriends have ended up in some incarnation of her lovers, like haunted the book, seriously. Anyway.
Interesting.
Never mind. Yeah, well, I didn't expect that during the sex scenes. I was like going back going, shit, that looks like Jamie. How did they do it? Anyway. I mean, to go back to the way that I treated her death, I mean, Luxemburg's writing is sublime. She is such a poet. She really is. She's got so many amazing segments of writing. And she says here, like, I want to affect people like a clap of thunder, to inflame their minds with the breadth of my vision, the strength of my conviction, and the power of my expression. And she really does that. So it's just beautiful being able to take this incredibly moving writing and then being able to chop it up and slice it about and slip it into with different pictures and different tones and paces of where I wanted the story to go. And there's one particular quote, which is actually a quote from when she's in a Bahnstrasse women's prison. I'm not going to read it because you have to read the book. But she's talking about life itself and inexpressible joy. And then when I read that quote, I just went, ha, I can completely take that out of context and put it with the events of her death. And it's quite nice, actually, because Luxemburg actually writes her own epitaph twice. I mean, she expects to be hanged for her participation in the 1905 uprising. And she signs off a letter, and that one, and she goes, we're living in turbulent times when all that exists deserves to perish. During my lifetime, things have gone superbly. I'm proud of that. The cell doors are being closed now. Wow, she's written one epitaph then, but then she gets bribed out of prison and then she carries on living. She always expects to be a martyr because, like, right when she starts out as a politician, as a student with a political awareness, a whole bunch of socialists get hanged. So she kind of expects that is what's going to happen. I'm not saying she wanted it. They're saying that awareness was always there. This is what you signed up for. And then she also writes her epitaph before, the night before she's arrested, she goes, "Order prevails in Berlin, you foolish lackeys. Your order is built on sand. Tomorrow the revolution will rise up again, clashing its weapons, and it will proclaim with trumpets blazing, I was, I am, I shall be." And it's great, yeah. People flog that, people work that quote to death around Rosa Luxemburg. So it was quite nice to sort of sidestep that and create some other narratives that interrogate that and kind of I don't know, just get it back to being a person, just a person that died.
Yeah, and you do that beautifully. I can't recommend people read that enough.
Don't you think that they should make a film about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Even in our last interview, they said that.
This is the second time I've had an email from some major Hollywood scout person going, "Hey, who has the film rights to Red Rosa?" And I'm like, "I've got the film rights to Red Rosa."
Yeah.
And then they never emailed back.
Come on.
The next Netflix miniseries.
God, that'd be amazing. If anybody listening by any chance has any networking or association with anybody that can make this into a film, let's make that happen, because it is ready for it.
I have the rights, and I would also be really good to work on with the script, definitely.
God, I would love that so much. But
I would like money. Anyway, yeah.
Moving towards the end, given the infinite array of issues we face today, like climate chaos, insurgent fascism, a decaying capitalist world order, what can and should we learn from the life and legacy of Rosa? What can she teach us today?
Wow. There's a lot about her writing that is was original at the time and is relevant now. I mean, she had an understanding of the way that capitalism and the military-industrial complex are linked, and the unending expansion of capitalism, how it basically she prefigured globalization and the military-industrial complex in her writing in a way that's quite subtle and interesting. She's a fierce opponent of colonialism and of the genocide of indigenous peoples. And again, she has this, even though it's quite a separate thread in her writing, she has this incredible ecological sensitivity, which I think would these days make her it would make her an ecological writer now, even though she didn't have a political framework with which to peg that in at the time. She's got a famous quote. She's actually quoting Karl Kautsky, but she's the person who's put it down in writing in a format which we know of these days. Her famous quote is "Socialism or barbarism," and we are looking at that choice so starkly now.
Absolutely.
We find a solution to the climate crisis, which results in climate justice, and we take on the power of the billionaires and of runaway capitalism, and we dismantle it in its own terms, and we put human survival and equality and justice at the forefront of a brave new world. Either we do that or we perish, and the barbarism, we can see it all around in the rise of right-wing thinking and in the fracturing of any kind of semblance of international agreement. And the way to do it is through a mass movement. And again, that we can only come to power with the clear and explicit will of the great majority of people. Luxemburg, there's two things. One is she really believed in a democratic vision where everybody has a say in what is going on. And the other thing is she was a theorist of the moments of revolutions, of what happens when people take to the streets, what happens when people take direct control of their own affairs. And she's got some amazing writing on it in her writings called The Mass Strike. And it can just be a little thing that can spark something so much bigger. We have to hope and pray and actualize and make that a reality, because we really don't have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully said. Kate Evans, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute honor to read your work and then to get to talk to you. It's just been amazing. Before I let you go, can you please let listeners know where they can buy this amazing book of yours and where people can find you and your other work online?
Okay. Well, there are 15 foreign editions. So to buy it in Turkish, Korean, Swedish. Oh, it's going to sound really poncy if I rattle them all off. There's a Slovenian edition. Get the Slovenian edition from Viki Vagi Knjigi Books. Actually, really do, because they're really sound.
Yeah.
If you want the English version of Red Rosa, it's published by Verso Books. You can buy Verso Books direct. The cheapest way to do it, okay, is watch Verso for one of their flash sales, and then you'll get it really cheap, yeah? But you can also buy them direct from me at cartoonkate.co.uk. And I have a shop, and I will sign them for you, and I will send them out to you, and I will give you a personalized dedication with a little picture of Rosa Luxemburg that I will draw by hand.
Beautiful.
Yeah, because that means I have money, which obviously, you know, I wouldn't be so capitalist as to want to survive or anything. Yeah. That was a very rambling answer.
That's all right. No.
You can buy them from Verso. You can buy them from me at cartoonkate.co.uk. You can order them at your library. You can go and support your local bookshop in person by ordering it in. Do not buy it from Amazon. Amazon do not pay taxes, and Jeff Bezos is rich enough.
Hell yeah, absolutely. We second that. Yeah, the opportunity to buy it directly through you is amazing. I hope people that are listening right now take you up on that. Thanks again, Kate. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for listening. Rev Left Radio is 100% listener funded. If you like what we do here, you can support us at patreon.com/Rev Left Radio, or make a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/Rev Left Radio. Links will be in the show notes.